Hello everybody. If you'd like to grab yourselves a cuppa and grab a seat, we can start today's event. So good afternoon everyone. My name's Fiona York and I'm the Executive Officer of Housing for the Aged Action Group, known as HAG or HAG if you prefer. HAG specialises in the housing needs of older people in Victoria. We're a community organisation and we've been around for over 40 years now. We have about 850 members, some of whom are joining us today. And we are committed to finding long-term solutions to the housing crisis facing older people. Before we begin, I'd like to acknowledge that we're meeting on the unceded lands of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation and the various traditional lands of the people joining us online today. And I pay my respects to elders past and present and extend that respect to any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people joining us today. I'd also like to highlight that First Nations people are disproportionately affected by the housing crisis. I'd like to acknowledge some of the people who are in the room and online today. Of course, we have some members of Parliament. We'll be hearing shortly from Katie Hall, member of Footscray, who's hosting this event. And we also have some people from the Victorian Public Service and some sector colleagues. So I'd like to say hi and thank you to coming from Brian Lippman, the CEO of Wintringham, Emma Greenhalgh, CEO National Shelter, Jennifer Beveridge from Tenants Victoria and Deborah Di Natale from the Council to Homeless Persons. Who else have we got? Peter Sibley from United Housing Co-op, Emma Bacon from Sweltering Cities and Caitlin Butters from the Victorian Public Tenants. And Minister Kilkenny, lovely to see you, thank you. So welcome and thank you all for joining us today. We have a really great bunch of people and it's great to see so much enthusiasm and support for addressing the issues of older people and housing. I also have some late apologies. Unfortunately, Minister for Consumer Affairs, Gabrielle Williams, has come down with COVID, so is unable to speak today, sends her apologies. We also have apologies from the Premier, Jacinta Allen, Martha Haylett MP, Ross Pence MP, Bronwyn Halfpenny MP, Alison Merchant MP, Will Fowles MP, and the Residential Tenancies Commissioner, Heather Holst, as well as the Convener for Labor for Housing, Juliana Todorovic. A couple of little housekeeping matters before we kick off. We are recording this event. If you're online and you don't want to have your face recorded, please put your camera off. And we also have our fantastic volunteer guru who will be taking photos. If you're not interested in having your photo taken, please let one of our staff know. Hopefully you know where the bathrooms are. They're out that door behind a very big fancy wooden door, quite hard to find. And if you're on Zoom, all the people on Zoom should be on mute, but please use the chat function if you have questions. There will be an opportunity to ask questions later on today. So, in many ways, we're really lucky in Victoria for older people's housing. We have HAG's Home at Last service, which is a unique specialist older person's housing service. And we're the only state in the country that has a priority housing category for people aged 55 years and older. We also have housing stock, public housing stock, that's just for people aged 55, including 18 high-rises and many smaller low-rise public housing as well. So in that way, we're actually the envy of many states and territories. But despite this, older people are still bearing the brunt of the housing crisis. There's still a lot of work to be done, and we look forward to working with all of you to progress some solutions. This afternoon, you'll hear from some of our decision makers, learn about the latest research on older people's housing in Victoria, and get a brief overview of what housing options do exist for older people, including retirement housing options. And then we'll end the session with some suggested solutions and what we can all do together moving forward. So firstly, I would like to welcome the Honourable Katie Hall, MP, who is member for Footscray, my member, to introduce the event. Katie Hall is the Parliamentary Secretary for Housing and Creative Industries. She's the member of Footscray and she's proud to represent her area where her family has called home for generations. She was first elected to Victorian Parliament in 2018 and she's passionate about how government and community can work together to bring about meaningful change. This is especially true for housing, where collaboration between diverse stakeholders is vital to tackling the housing crisis. As Parliamentary Secretary for Housing, Katie has a focus on ensuring that our most vulnerable citizens are listened to and that their voices inform best practice policy. So welcome, Katie.
Thanks so much, Fiona, and hello to everyone who is joining us online and here in Parliament. It's so great to have such a wonderful turnout, and also very special to see people from my electorate, and great to see Peter, who's working on a fantastic project in West Footscray through Uniting Housing and the Lions Club, which will specifically house older women in my community. So it's great to see you, and wonderful to have the Minister for Planning here as well, Sonia Kilkenny, and acknowledge Minister Kilkenny's work through the housing statement, which is a year old almost. Yes, and the ambitious reforms to deliver 800,000 more houses, because as we often discuss in this sector, we need more of everything. And so it's wonderful to have Minister Kilkenny here. I'd like to acknowledge that we're on the traditional lands of the Wurundjeri people and pay my respects to elders past and present, and also acknowledge the challenges that First Nations communities have with housing, and thank you all for your work in this sector to support that particular community. The Victorian Government knows that good housing policy requires collaboration with those among us who have lived experience, and it relies on the generosity and willingness of people who are coming along today to share their stories with us. So I'd like to thank Chuping and Vera. Speaking to a room of strangers about the challenges you've faced is no easy task. So it's really important for us as policymakers to be able to hear your stories firsthand. And of course, as acknowledged, older Victorians do face unique challenges and circumstances as renters, whether they're in private rentals or social housing. And being able to age in place in a home that supports your needs and allows you to live and age with dignity is a vital part of any strategy addressing the housing needs of older Victorians. And a successful strategy requires us to collaborate with groups like HAG. I like to say HAG, I think it sounds like Tajay, it's a bit fancy. We've been proud to support the Home at Last program in every budget our government has delivered, and we will continue to listen and learn from the wonderful team at HAG that do so much for our community. We have a fantastic agenda this afternoon, and I'm really looking forward to hearing from everyone on the panel. The opportunity to hear from such passionate and talented stakeholders, academics, sector professionals, and those with lived experience is what makes my role extremely rewarding. I just hasten to add that Parliament House is a fluid place. So please do not be alarmed by the loud bells that will ring from time to time. And if a group of people get up and leave, it's not out of rudeness. It's because we are required to go and vote or be somewhere. So my apologies in advance for that fluidity, but we will have a range of members of Parliament joining us throughout this session. There's been a lot of interest from across the Parliament. And on that note, I'd like to welcome Professor Wendy Stone from Swinburne University to speak about her research. Thank you.
Great, I'm not quite as tall as Katie, so here we are. So thank you very much Katie, and it's terrific to have you here today. Thank you also, Fiona, and I'll join the party on Haag, and to all organisers for hosting this. I'd like to also pay respects to Elders past, present, emerging, and also recognise First Nations people joining online today as well as in the room. I'd also like to acknowledge as well the people with lived experience of housing challenges and housing precarity in later life who are here. I've had the kind of real honour actually of working with Haag now for a couple of years, and that's involved oftentimes sitting together and being with people with really challenging experiences, and I've learned so much, and it's been a very generous, open experience. Thank you. Of course, also acknowledging Minister Kilkenny here. It's just fantastic to have this level of support for this event and the issues that we're discussing. So to move on quickly, what I'd like to do is present some research that was conducted by myself and colleagues at Swinburne University. Margaret Reynolds is here in the room with us as one of those. Dr. Parrette Baroya is unable to be in person, is online. We conducted this in partnership with Haag and also researchers at Western Sydney University and Curtin University as a national piece of work to really articulate and enumerate the scale and the way that the housing challenge facing older Australians is shifting and growing across our country. But today I'm focusing on our state specifically, but these challenges are not unique to Victoria. But we have some unique policy discussions and opportunities here that we can perhaps feed this evidence into. So I guess, first of all, before moving into some of the data, we just have to also acknowledge that we're living in a society which is ageing. So it's not only the case that older people face housing challenges, but an increasing proportion of our population is at risk of housing challenges within a heavily financialised, really expensive, cutthroat kind of housing system that is not fit for purpose often for older people. What we've done in our research, might go to the first slide. Oh, that's me. Thanks, Ruben. Is we took 2 lots of census data really in this particular piece. We looked at 10-year change over time in how housing is tracking for people aged 55 years and over. And we looked at various different groups. I'm going to only touch on a few very high-level points today, but we do have the Victorian report and the national report available online through the Haag website. So please feel free to get in touch as well if anything interests you to follow up. This report really maps out the scale of where points of precarity are becoming exacerbated, if you like, within and across our housing system. So we weren't only looking at homelessness and marginal housing. I'm not actually even going to really report on those sort of statistics today, but to acknowledge that that's the very, very acute, pointy end of housing precarity. And that housing precarity within homelessness and marginal housing and crisis sort of systems and experiences sits on top, if you like, of a myriad of problems that are emerging across what we have traditionally known as very secure sites of housing, including home ownership. So I'm going to recap very briefly 3 key points in case people do get the ding and have to leave the room quickly. The 3 key points that our research points to are, number 1, that when we shift the focus away from individual attributes and what people might be doing wrong within a housing system, we can see very, very clearly that people are actually trying to navigate a very, very difficult, expensive system, often without very much information, without much support. As Fiona mentioned, luckily we have Haag in Victoria, and this is a good place to be. But people, the sort of precarity we're seeing is widening across home ownership sectors. It's increasing in private rental. We have less social housing than we need. But it's also affecting, as the second point, more and more people of different kinds of demographics, so up the income spectrum, if you like, and a wider pool of people. And thirdly, we're seeing really clear spatial effects. So precarity isn't only clustered within some metropolitan neighbourhoods or some regional areas. We're seeing a really, really wide sweep of precarity in Victoria to respond to. So I need to be conscious of time. So just very, very quickly, let's look at this. So in the decade to the last census period, which was in 2021, and here we are in 2024, we know that things have actually worsened in expense and accessibility since that time. What we saw were that fewer Victorians aged 55 and up were owning their own home outright. So there are more people reaching retirement age with mortgage debt. This is really problematic. So in the second part of this slide, and please don't, please just stay with the broad narrative and we can follow up in the details at the break or later. But the broad narrative is that fewer people now are reaching retirement age with no housing costs, and this is hugely problematic. Our aged pensions are set on the assumption that people will have very low or no housing costs in later life, and so having to find mortgage payments or rental costs within an aged pension is a fixed pension is hugely problematic. More people are paying off a mortgage or are struggling to work out what to do with mortgage debt. As we all know, the big build, the investment in social housing in Victoria that have been announced since this report was put together are extremely welcome. We've seen fewer older people living in public and community housing over time in Victoria. We're pretty low on a national sort of level for the proportion of older people housed in social housing, and it's really welcome that we're really starting to invest here. This kind of investment must really include and take account of the needs of all people across age groups, young people, families, but particularly when we think about old people, there are accessibility needs. There are real requirements to house older people well. Older people have different needs than other population groups, which we really must take into account when we're thinking about designing for and with older people in the social and affordable housing sectors. Hugely problematic. I'm sure that there's no one in the room and online who doesn't know that the private rental sector is a very difficult place to be. Over this 10-year period, perhaps one of the most shocking things we actually found is that there's been a 77% increase in the numbers of people, older people aged 55 and over, who are living in the private rental sector in Victoria. That's a huge shift in where older people are located in terms of policy settings, policy intervention points, and the capacity for older people to have direct control and autonomy over the built form, the materiality, whether they're able to put in handrails, shower seats, accessible doorways. These are really, really tough issues to manage in the private rental sector. We also know that there is very real age-based discrimination that happens, and despite the so far very, very good and excellent efforts of the Residential Tenancies Commissioner and her office, we still have a very long way to go to make the private rental sector fit for purpose. We're so far away from this being a safe, secure, affordable housing option for older people. But this is where we find increasing proportions of very low-income older people and low-income older people, and even moderate to higher income older people are starting to move into the private rental sector as the only place to be. So this is where we really need to think about purpose-designed and secure rental options where people can't maintain or achieve or remain in home ownership or access at the moment secure social housing and affordable housing. So low-income older renters are at extreme precarity this is a bit of a slip from, if you like, mortgage debt, almost immediately for many older people into homelessness. We know from other research that we're working on with National Shelter and HARG that there are many people who may have, some equity, some savings. It's not enough to be eligible for deep support, and it's also not enough to secure independently housing that people need. So there's a missing middle cohort that we'll be speaking about soon in the coming period. So this is a space that we need a lot more attention on. Women are overrepresented here, and I know from other research, including with the Residential Tenancies Commissioner, that Aboriginal First Nations Victorians are also in particularly precarious situation in the rental sector. Just two quick geographic slides to finish before I think the important work of the day is actually listening and learning from lived experience. So just to say that in the 10-year period that we were talking about, we can see that private rental, this is private rental in particular, people are renting across the state. So there are clusters, there are larger areas in which people are located, but this is really a kind of housing situation where people are being bumped along. So people are having to move quite regularly with fairly short-term leases in Australia and are being moved into regional areas. We used to talk in academic sense and policy terms about welfare migration, where very low-income people might move further and further away from amenity to afford more affordable housing. There simply is nowhere far enough to go. The price rocketing that we've seen since COVID and since actually this census data means that there is simply nowhere to go. There is nowhere far enough away from affordable housing. There is no affordable housing. This is hugely problematic. It also means that, just to show the metropolitan version of this slide, that when we're talking about responding to the housing needs and service support wraparound needs for older people in private rental and in precarity, marginal housing, homelessness services, we're really talking about a very dispersed kind of difficult situation. We're talking about people who are hard to reach and geographically very dispersed and very, very highly mobile, unfortunately. I think just to wrap up on this slide, the implications of this whole of system look really mean that we really do need to think about older people in a systemic way. It's thinking about how can we rapidly get social and affordable housing on the ground that's really adequate for older people. How can we really make the private rental sector a really decent home in which to age? How can we do that? And how can we bring older people into the tent on those discussions? As well, we need to think about innovations. People have mentioned that Peter Silby's here. For example, cooperative models. What kinds of other models can we think about that can really meet the needs of older people? So I'm looking forward now to hearing about the real important work of the day, which is from lived experience and others in the room, but to thank everyone for the opportunity to share this research with you. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that, Wendy. I'm now going to invite our first speaker up from one of our working groups, Vera Bloom. She has recently joined our LGBTIQA+ advocacy group, and she's committed to raising awareness about the housing challenges for older women. Vera, would you like to join us?
Thank you, Fiona. I suppose to start off with, I need to explain how I became homeless. I was living in Tasmania. I had a mortgage on my place, but I'd always promised my mother, who was living in New Zealand, that I would be with her as she got older. So I moved to Auckland to be with her, and I didn't expect to be there for 10 years. During that time, my house was repossessed, and I stayed with Mum until she died. Then when I came back to Australia, I was moving around backpacker hostels, and they are not terribly friendly. In fact, some of them will only let you stay there for 2 weeks because they don't want older Australians making it their home. The last one I was in was a 15-bed dorm, and you're also dealing with a lot of young kids that are tourists that love to party all night, love to have sex whenever they feel like it. And the story goes on. I had a roof over my head, that was fine, but it was not my space. So one year, round about Seniors Week, I was wandering around Fed Square, and that's where I came across HAG, because they had a stall there. So I contacted them. They put me onto someone who came and checked out where I was living, and they rapidly went into work to get me out of there. So thank you. The person they put me onto found I'm living in a 1-bed apartment, unit, cocoon, whatever you want to call it, but it's my space, and I have a roof over my head, and I can do what I like within the bounds of renting. It wasn't long after that I moved in there that I found out I was diagnosed with breast cancer. And I can tell you what, if I didn't have that space, I would not have coped. So therefore I still volunteer with HAG, and I thank Fiona and all her staff, because otherwise I wouldn't be where I am now. So thank you.
Thank you, Vida, for sharing that story. I'd also like to acknowledge Minister for Housing, Harriet Shing, who's joined us. Thank you so much for coming. So as Vida and Wendy have illustrated through those presentations, it really shows how important it is to have stable, affordable housing that you can call your own for your health and your well-being. And we know that housing is fundamental and the #1 factor in determining health and well-being for older people. So we just can't understate the importance of it. Without affordable housing, people's mental and physical health decline rapidly, and then this then places pressure on the crisis housing and homelessness systems. As Wendy and Vida have pointed out, the private rental market is just not a realistic solution for the over 160,000 older Victorian who are living on fixed incomes in the private rental market. And we have seen some reforms, some really important reforms in the Residential Tenancies Act recently, which is great. But unfortunately, our Home at Last service is still receiving calls daily from older people who are receiving eviction notices, rent increases that they can't afford, or who are living in really poor quality housing that's impacting their health. About 50% of our clients have got mobility issues, which means that they need accessible housing in order to be able to stay where they're living. So aside from private rental, what else is available for people who don't own their own homes, the increasing numbers of older people who don't own their own homes in this state? So of course, firstly, there's public and community housing, which is often called social housing. Public housing is housing that's owned and managed by government, and we think that this is a really suitable option for people who are eligible because it has rents that are fixed according to their income, and you pay no more than 25% of your income, and you have security of tenure, which means that you can age in place. We really want to see a growth in public housing, just like public schools, public libraries, public roads, public hospitals. We see it as essential infrastructure for our community, and we don't want to lose public housing. We've also seen a really big growth recently in the community housing sector, and many of our clients and members live in community housing, so they also have rents that are capped at usually around 30% of their income, as well as Commonwealth Rent Assistance. However, there's still a lot of confusion from some of our members around how rents are set, and there's some inconsistency around how community housing is managed. So we'd like to see some more consistent regulation and standards applied to rent setting, tenancy selection and management consistent across both public and community housing. And we really want to see a growth in both public and community housing. Shout out to Victorian Public Tenants Association for that. I'd also like to mention housing co-ops. They're often forgotten about when we're talking about housing options, but they're a great example of how tenants can be genuinely involved in decision-making about their housing. They proliferated in the 1980s with government support, and though some of them are becoming registered community housing providers, they really struggle to compete with some of the larger providers, and as member-led organisations, the increasing amounts of regulatory requirements. So we'd love to see more visibility of housing co-ops and more support for them. But of course, as we know, public and community housing are subject to eligibility criteria, including an asset limit, which means that if you have more than about $38,000 in savings, you won't be eligible for this type of housing. And Victoria has one of the lowest asset limits in the country. So what options are there for people who have more than $38,000 but less than around $300,000 or $400,000, which is what you need to move into another type of housing? The answer is not much, and many of the older people that come to our service, particularly older women, find it really difficult and are sitting in private rental, depleting their assets until they become eligible because of the lack of options. So in the past, we had independent living units, which were low-cost rental options for people. They were often all across the suburbs and regional Victoria, often run by small not-for-profits, and they basically sit outside the social housing system. The sector's really radically reduced over the last couple of years, 20 years or so, as the stock is sold off or redeveloped into more lucrative types of retirement housing or residential aged care. And we occasionally get calls from these providers who want to be able to continue to provide this housing, but really struggle with bringing their housing stock up to standards, and also how do they access the funding that may be available. We do think that a lot of older people like to live in independent living units, and in the past it was a great option. We're just seeing a big decline in that. Of course, there's retirement villages, both for-profit and not-for-profit, and residential parks, which are also known as manufactured homes or land lease communities or lifestyle communities. We'll be talking a little bit more, Shane, our senior retirement housing worker, will be talking a little bit more about that. And we do have a lot of ideas about how this sector can be reformed. We have members who live in that type of housing and have been asking for things to be improved for a very long time. So we'll talk a little bit about how we can bring those ideas forward shortly. So of course, demand for these options is rising. We do have an ageing population. Lots of older people are being priced out of the private rental market and being evicted into homelessness or having to couch surf or stay with friends and family in unsafe situations. Some of these options, like caravan packs, were never intended to be long-term, but they are becoming long-term and again have difficulty with mobility issues. So before we talk a little bit more about retirement housing in detail, I was going to invite Glenda Roberts, who's a member of our retirement accommodation group, to speak. Unfortunately, she's had to have surgery today. So she's asked me to read out her story, so bear with me. It's not as good as the real thing, but hopefully you'll be able to get a sense of her story. So this is an edited version of something that Glenda wrote about her own life. And there's a photo of her. So this is what she writes. Little did I know when I first embarked on my first marriage in 1971 at the tender age of 19 that I would be signing up for a lifetime of housing insecurity. I had a stable childhood. I lived in the same public housing street for about 15 years. In the 1950s and 60s, my dad was a blue-collar worker and that offered him stable employment. Mum stayed at home with the kids until getting a part-time job when I was about 12 years old. As the eldest of 7 children, I had to take on some babysitting duties, including looking after my younger siblings after school until Dad got home. I was a pretty dab hand at changing a nappy and feeding a baby bottle by then, and this was a preview of the caring roles I would take on as a mother later in life. A role society says it values, but it left me more vulnerable to crisis as I grow older. During my first marriage, my husband did not enjoy the kind of stable career that my father did. We moved 10 times during this 22-year marriage. I experienced emotional abuse throughout. My eldest daughter went to 4 different primary schools. It's only now that I realised that unstable housing took its toll on her as well. In my late 40s, I embarked on a second marriage to a man I thought was honest and trustworthy. He was both of those things, but he also carried with him a lot of emotional baggage from childhood abuse. This kept him from holding down a job for any length of time. When this marriage ended in 2016, I was thrust into the short-term rental market. I had to leave the marital home quickly due to my husband's increasingly threatening behaviour. The housing I acquired was an old 2-bedroom miner's cottage which was structurally unsound. A heavy rainstorm came through one night and the place was flooded. I had taken a 6-month lease on this property and I'd been living there for almost 3 months when the floods hit. I decided after that asset settlement that I would look to purchase a place of my own. While I did have some savings, all I could hope to afford was a small unit in a local retirement village. The unit I purchased is called a studio apartment, but it is essentially a 5-metre square bedsit. So after leaving my childhood home, I had to wait until I was almost 65 years old to have a stable home that I owned outright without a mortgage or any debts. I'm sure many women over 55 have found themselves in this situation due to divorce and other disruptive life events. When I realise I'm now better off than many people over 55, I've had time to reflect on the unstable housing I've experienced throughout my adult life. Living in such a small space has also enabled me to downsize and dispose of much unwanted stuff to the degree that I've become a minimalist and don't like clutter. But it comes with difficulties too. I offended my children by parcelling up some memorabilia from their childhood, photos, school reports, etc., and sending it off to them in the mail. They thought I was excommunicating them from my life, but they didn't have an appreciation of the small space that I'm forced to live in. It was the most I could afford at the time, and I've adapted well to living in the space. It's cheap to heat and cool, takes no time to do the housework, and I've been here now for 7 years. There are beautiful established gardens all around this village, which I enjoy walking around. While I've had some disputes with the village owners about maintenance, I've finally reached a feeling of peace and freedom. It's a strata title arrangement, so I own the unit and the land it sits on. It's now the longest time I've lived at the same address for 50 years, and I can say that this stability and feeling of security is heartwarming and very good for my mental health and well-being. I hope my story gives you some understanding of the importance of having different types of affordable housing options for people as they grow older. For people like me with too much savings to qualify for significant support, but not enough to compete in the private housing market, retirement housing where residents are treated well is crucial. That was from Glenda. So I'd now like to ask Shane McGrath, our senior retirement housing worker, to come up and talk about some of the challenges that we see with the retirement housing system. He's been part of our tenancy and retirement team for over 10 years and is an expert in the field. So come on up, Shane.
Thanks, everyone. So I'm here to talk specifically about residential parks and retirement villages, not sort of the broader retirement housing space. And what I mean by that, we're talking about forms of retirement housing that have a lot of similarities. They're communities for older people that promise safety, social connection. They have similar kinds of amenities and facilities. They look the same. You know, if you were looking at a photo of a retirement village and a residential park, you probably wouldn't be able to tell the difference. And they're both rapidly growing industries, as you'd expect, you know, with the ageing population that we have in Victoria. There are also important differences. In a residential park, residents buy a unit and rent the land that it sits on, so they're sort of demountable units. They're covered by Part 4A of the Residential Tenancies Act. As Fiona mentioned, they go by a lot of different names. Retirement villages are made up of independent living units that can be occupied on payment of an ingoing contribution. That can be a purchase price, as for Glenda's strata title village, or it can be a loan made to the operator, a donation, all kinds of arrangements. The other key similarity between these types of housing that we see is similar problems. Older Victorians put their life savings into these residencies with expectations about security and respect, and then they find that their housing, their financial security, and their future ability to access aged care if they need it depend on these systems that just don't adequately protect or respect them. We run a casework service that assists retirement housing residents, and to give some examples of what I mean, I have a 90-year-old client who was evicted from a retirement village this year. She'd paid hundreds of thousands of dollars to live there. She'd stayed for about 10 years. She was harassed over a period of years until she was forced to leave. and the village made absolute windfall profits out of driving her out in that way. At the moment, I'm representing a 64-year-old man who's being treated for a brain tumour. He's also being evicted from a retirement village. Again, paid hundreds of thousands of dollars to live there. We have another client who was a residential park resident until she complained too much about the potholes in the road, so she was evicted. And even more commonly across these housing types, we see residents who are too scared to do or say anything about the problems that they see because they worry about what the consequences will be. So we saw, a residential park with over 400 older residents that banned mobility aids from its common facilities. So you couldn't bring your walker or mobility scooter into the bowling green or the community hall. It took over a year for us to get them to reverse that policy. This is a range of problems and concerns, but they have common roots. The key problems are about the dominant financial models in these types of housing, which effectively are that you pay the cost of your accommodation, like the actual price of living there is paid when you leave, as a deferred management fee or an exit fee. That can be tens, sometimes hundreds of thousands of dollars. But to move in, you don't pay the cost of living there, you just sort of pay an extra amount, a premium. You pay more than double that actual cost to be able to live there. It's the sort of an ingoing contribution. As you can imagine, a model where operators make their money when residents leave creates incentives for operators to manipulate the times when people leave. And that can include the kind of really heartbreaking evictions that I talked about, or just sort of patterns of harassment and pressure to get rid of people. It also creates incentives for parks and villages to sustain residencies artificially by delaying the sale or reletting of a unit when someone's moved into care or passed away, so they can keep collecting rent or maintenance charges, or so that a deferred management fee will continue to accrue. That financial model also makes it functionally impossible for residents to leave a village if it's being poorly managed or badly maintained. To leave, they'd have to pay that tens of thousands of dollars in exit fees, and then again, to move into a comparable park, they would have to pay more than double the actual price of living there. This lets operators get away with really outrageous, like poor management, cuts to services, mistreatment, harassment, and real bullying of residents that you just wouldn't see in any other consumer arrangement because the consumers would just go somewhere else. And residents can't even publicly criticise these operators a lot of time to warn other people, because if they did that, it would devalue the homes that they will need to sell and make it harder and more costly when they do need to leave. And I emphasise, when we talk about this, it's not about how much residents pay or how much villages profit. Like, profit is part of the reason this is an expanding industry and we need that. It's about the way these fees and charges are structured and the ways the law allows these fees and charges to be structured that creates such antisocial effects around consumer choice and the ability to age in place. So I see that I'm supposed to be talking about solutions. I'm not sure if I knew that when I stepped up here, but HAG does have a set of key policy recommendations to address these problems. We want to see simpler contracts, fairer fees, and protections for residents' rights to sell and leave a park or village. We want to see mandatory training and accreditation for park and village managers. And we need a retirement housing ombudsman, because the existing forms of dispute resolution, including both VCAT and alternative dispute resolution approaches based on mediation, just haven't worked for older people living in these kinds of housing. I was also told that we want to acknowledge the work the government is doing in these areas. So there's a review of the Retirement Villages Act that is underway, that's been running for about 5 years. But the exposure draft for the amendment bill that was released a year ago didn't do enough to address these concerns. And we have no update about what's happening with that review since. But we also acknowledge that the government has started some work in the residential park space, and we are excited to be involved in that and make sure that we see the changes that residents need. I'd love to talk more about these issues, but that's my time. Thank you.
Thanks, Shane. We do actually have a handout at the front in the desk with some of our policy asks around res parks if people are interested in those. And yes, so next, I firstly should say that unfortunately the Minister for Consumer Affairs was planning on coming, and she is driving some really important reforms in the residential park space at the moment. However, due to COVID, she's not here, but we really look forward to working with her on that. I'd like to acknowledge some of the MPs that have joined us as well. We have Tim Reid, Samantha Ratnam, Nina Taylor, Ryan Batchelor, Have I missed anybody? I hope not. Steve McGee, thank you so much for coming and participating in today's event, and I can see Ben Rogers, Acting CEO from Codavic, is here too. All right, so now we'd like to hear from Chuping. Chuping is a member of our LGBTIQA+ working group, and she is going to speak about some of her experiences and challenges that older people find themselves with housing. Coming up, Chuping.
I'm a bit shorter, so I'll put it down. Well, first, you heard Fiona speak nicely of me. My name, Chuping, means calm peace. Although my family brought me up a Christian, I came across gurus and different forms of arts of practicing peace. And Chuping actually means calm peace. So I ditched my conventional Christian name of, Margaret, Helen, Mary, just to be different. So here am I. Actually, after years of looking for peace, I realised a certain area in my life I didn't have peace. I didn't have peace and state of mind in the home. And I didn't even realise I faced so much homelessness. What happened was that back in the beginning of 2008, I came over to Melbourne from Wellington, New Zealand for a 70th birthday party of my fairy godmother's, who was into crystals and all sorts of amazing sort of light-minded, hearted things, and fell in love with singing. I heard the choir Hard Knocks, and those of you have heard of us sing. We've been going, we just had our 18th birthday. So I fell in love with singing. So within 2 days, I decided I want to live in Melbourne. And I had to go home and pack up my life, pack up my job. I moved here with no family. And that was the beginning of couch surfing, temporary accommodations in student homes, and even paying to house at my friends' houses, naive as I was. Thought I was helping them, which is fine, and they were helping me, but in a way, I didn't realise what homelessness mean until I went into more depths about understanding about that peace of mind. And I was lucky enough about 4 years ago, maybe about the same time I had signed up for some form of public housing, and I was told at the time the waiting list was anything between 18 months to 3 years. And I sat back, relaxed, thinking, that was it. And I was lucky enough to be invited to be on this, become a member of the advocacy group, and I learnt more about it. And out of the blue, about 18 months ago, I was talking to one of the staff members about me being on this other housing group waiting, and she checked up for me, and I have no priority lists after 4 years. I'm still at the bottom of the rank. And I don't know if, I was lucky enough to be in an organisation such as HUG that cares so much that maybe I was given special consideration as well, and the universe was looking after me. So I had, within about 3 months, not even 3 months, less than that, I was offered my first place, and I had this dream of living in the St Kilda by the sea. And unfortunately, this apartment was far from the sea, 20 minutes and 20 minutes from the shops. And I was lucky enough not to get it. And then out of the blue, I got something very local in Footscray. I never dreamt as an ex-hippie that I want to live in a concrete jungle, but now I have my forever home, and that means not necessarily being in there forever, but knowing I have security. Because even in living and paying rent in my friend's home, I wasn't allowed to change the wall colours, I wasn't allowed to put up loud posters, and now I have my home to be who I am, and that's what's made it so amazing. And I speak highly, and I am an advocate for this amazing organisation that's given me a future security of having a home I can call my own.
Thank you, Chuping. That was fantastic. I now am very excited to welcome Minister Harriet Shing to the podium. Harriet Shing is, of course, the Housing Minister, and it's a great opportunity for us to hear from her today. As Labor member for the Eastern Victoria region, Harriet is committed to identifying and enhancing opportunities that will enable communities throughout the region to thrive. So big welcome, Harriet. Thank you.
Thank you so much, everybody, for the opportunity to meet with you today. At the outset, my apologies. I was in question time and I know where I would prefer to be rather than arriving here late. We are on Wurundjeri country, and I want to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the lands upon which we gather. And I also want to acknowledge any and all Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander leaders or emerging leaders who are here today, who are part of the work that HAG does and delivers and drives, but also part of the ongoing conversations within the space of ageing and well-being and connection that are so important as we work toward truth and treaty and as we walk together for the purpose of reconciliation. Katie Hall, Parliamentary Secretary Extraordinaire, thank you so much for all of your fearless advocacy in this space. It shines in the work that you do as a local advocate. Chuping's just talked about Footscray and the work that you do there in finding and providing support and solution to people is of crucial importance. To HAG, thank you so much for being here today, and so many familiar faces here in the room, including parliamentary colleagues. Now, the idea is that I do less talking and more listening to questions, which I will then answer. So I'm going to try to take my own advice. Thank you to everybody who is joining online as well. You will no doubt have questions that come after today's event and discussion. Please do find somebody from Homes Victoria who is here today, and I can see people in the audience, and otherwise track us down. Let's keep the conversation going. I want to thank the people who've spoken today, particularly those from a lived experience perspective. Glenda is not here. Chuping, thank you for your insights. We all know that housing is about so much more than bricks and mortar and a door that you can lock. It's about dignity and connection. And for people who've experienced homelessness or rough sleeping, there is a particular brand of humiliation that comes from not having somewhere to call your own and not having the certainty of somewhere that you know will be there for you for as long as you need it. We also know that when we add to the mix demographic changes, an ageing population, a growing population, that the challenges around providing support for older people often augment many of the issues and the difficulties that the rest of the population is also experiencing. When we start from the statistical perspective that fewer older people are in a position of home ownership, and fewer older people, in particular women, have savings that enable them to be able to live and to live well. We know that it's these intersecting challenges that mean that we as governments of all levels, council, state and federal, need to be understanding what need looks like, but also what opportunity to thrive looks like when we can do good planning and do it in a way that also accompanies that with funding. I am really determined within the housing portfolio to make sure that we are continuing to support and to provide funding to organisations like HAG. We have got a range of conversations that happen, and we've got the Council of Homeless Persons, Deb Di Natale, here today. Again, one of the organisations that auspices many conversations, whether it's about workforce, whether it's about the experiences of homelessness and rough sleeping. Caitlin, I think, was joining us online from the Public Tenants Union, and we've also got so many people from housing providers who are part of this conversation. Social housing, which is where my work sits, covers a range of different partnerships, and community housing providers are a big part of making sure that we can deliver that housing and that we can provide consistency and certainty. And whether that's a combination of factors through Commonwealth rent assistance, or whether it's through the public housing space and that 25% cap, certainty is important, and clarity in terms and conditions is important. So is autonomy. And this is where, as our population grows, we need to make sure that we are developing and delivering housing that is fit for purpose. And when I was coming into Parliament today, I was asked about a reduction in the number of bedrooms that is being delivered across the housing that we're building. And the answer to that is we need to respond to need. When we look at an ageing population, it is then about providing 1 and 2 bedroom accommodation rather than huge 4 and 5 bedroom homes that are not fit for purpose. We want to make sure that we're making the best use of the land available in communities so that people are connected, so that there is an opportunity, as Glenda said, to have gardens, to have open green space, connection to shops, to sporting clubs and organisations, to public transport, to health. It's hard work though, and it requires all levels of government to come together and many portfolios to work together as well. Gabrielle Williams, who isn't here today, you're right, has done a power of work, whether that's Residential Tenancies Act reform, the bans on underquoting, the work around portable bond. We're using that alongside private rental assistance around the sort of work to prioritise people in vulnerability or in need. Intersectionality, and as Minister for Equality, this is something which I'm working on through Pride in Ageing, through the Home at Last program and the support that we're providing. A lot of work that needs to go on, but this is also work that outlasts, and deservedly so, one budget, one forward estimates, one parliament, one government. This needs to continue for decades, and it needs to continue in a way that means that we are having uncomfortable conversations, but conversations that also talk about solutions, Shane, which is what you touched on when you were on your feet before. Thank you for the opportunity to present my initial perspectives and observations to you today, but as I want to underscore, this is a conversation, and your advocacy is as much a part of better outcomes as is any government's commitment to lean into the opportunities that presents, so that people in ageing, and all of us will get there if things go well, to find solutions to housing shortage, to availability and affordability that mean we can all live well and live on our terms with the greatest measure of autonomy available. Thank you so much. Let's kick it into some questions then, if there were any. I can see hands starting to pop up, so don't be shy. I've got, I think, about 5 minutes before I'll have to shoot off to my next commitment. And if I don't know the answer, I'm very happy to take it on notice, and we can then come back to you if you're able to leave your details, and we can perhaps do that. Yep. Oh, oh great.
Thank you, Minister. Thank you for coming, and thank you for giving us the opportunity to hear your viewpoint. Your colleague Claire O'Neill on Q&A on Monday said the answer to the housing crisis is supply, supply, supply. And I know that the Victorian government is making moves in that area. My question is 10% okay, but 20% of the big build partnership for public housing would be better? So allocating 20% of the new builds for public housing, would that be a better solution given our supply issues at the moment? 10%, you know, the rest of the world is looking at, in England, Germany, whatever, they're all new developments in terms of a social housing development are being allocated at the rate of about 20% of new builds.
So there's a few things in that. Thank you for that question. So the big housing build itself, that's $5.3 billion, and that's about delivering 12,000 new social homes across the state, and there's an additional $1 billion for at least 1,300 homes across rural and regional Victoria. So that's that figure there, and we are in the process of delivering that. We've allocated about 60% of that fund, which has delivered. We've got around 9,800 homes that are either complete in building or in planning stages, and we have seen thousands of families move into those new homes, including singles and couples and including older people. We're also working to deliver those partnerships as part of what we do through the housing statement, which I think is where you were going with what mixed development looks like. And this is where we need to partner with developers, with institutional investors, with those peak bodies and the stakeholders who are looking to make sure that as we lean into the challenges of population growth, and here in Melbourne we will see a population the size of London by 2050, that we have opportunities for people to live within communities. And when we talk to the uplift in social housing, again, we're talking about, I'll give the example of the Towers redevelopment, so that's 44 sites, and that will involve an uplift of 10% in social housing, but it will also mean we can treble the number of people who are living on those sites. And that's about making sure that we are also addressing the challenge of, as Minister O'Neill pointed out on Q&A, supply, which is impacting upon affordability. We're starting to see a change in the cost of housing here in Victoria, which shows that what we're doing is working. And it's also then about those partnerships. We do have partnerships, really strong partnerships with many developers and with our community housing sector, and it's about making sure that continues. Would we like to see more? Absolutely. Have we got a long way to go? Yes. Are we making significant progress? I would say yes, because we've invested record funding into social housing, and we're working with the Commonwealth. They've got the Social Housing Growth Fund, for example, $496 million. That will deliver around 679 additional properties that will be able to be used for those purposes. So it is ongoing work, and it's not work that can happen within one portfolio. It is work within our building and construction sector, within property and development. The planning minister has been a very, very central part of this work too. But our population growth is something which also requires, again, attention to social housing, but also what does affordable housing look like within private rental spaces? And this is where the work on the Planning and Environment Act and how we're defining affordability is a big opportunity for us to do more there, so that if people are wanting to be in private rentals, that is also available to them. That might be a portable bond scheme, it might be support with private rental assistance. So there are many, many elements to this, and we're going to continue to work on them. When you say 20%, I'm sure that if I had a giant novelty-sized checkbook I could pull out right now to make it 20%, I would. What we are doing is this record investment, though, that will see that uplift of 12,000.
It'd be a great election bid, though. 20%.
We've got one from the chat, if that's okay. Yeah.
I'm trying to, the people online have just got a question as well. So there's two questions from the chat that are kind of similar. This one is from Kathy Bevan. I'm still working full-time and earn money, but I'm wanting to retire next year. My concern is that I can't actually apply for social housing until I'm on the pension, while at the same time not being able to afford the rent that I'm paying now. I worry about ending up homeless while waiting for a place to live. Is there anything I can do to get on a list before I retire?
Okay. That is a hugely important question. So thank you to the person who asked that question online. One of the things that we have identified is that gap between the definition of affordable housing on the one hand and people not earning enough to be able to access social housing on the other. And this disproportionately affects women. We know that women retire with a smaller superannuation balance, if any superannuation balance at all, having worked in either insecure or vulnerable industries like retail or hospitality, marriage breakdowns, family violence, and again, not having an opportunity to save because you've been out of the paid workforce while having kids, raising them and caring and family responsibilities. There is work happening within the work of the Planning and Environment Act changes. That was developed around, over 30 years ago. So the times at which those parameters were set are well and truly behind us. We're also doing work around private rental assistance, that portable bond scheme. The work that Gabrielle Williams is tackling within the consumer affairs space is about making sure there is as much certainty there as possible. And again, the Social Housing Register has a number of specific eligibility requirements to it, but there are other options around tackling those challenges and the cost of living, which is eating into people's savings, older people's savings in particular, to the extent that they even exist, and that challenge, that gap between when you can access the pension on the one hand and the need to secure and to have access to stable rental accommodation on the other. That is a piece of work that is ongoing, and it is difficult and intricate work. It's not going to be one simple solution to it, though. There are many parts of the legal and the regulatory framework that require adjustment, amendment, improvement, and that's exactly what we're doing. So there are measures of assistance there, though. Consumer Affairs Victoria and following the advocacy from HAG have actually done a lot of work on this space, and the Residential Tenancies Act reforms have been a big part of releasing some of that pressure for people, just like the person who answered the question.
Oh, is it me? I think it's me. Hi, I'm Marg Darcy from
Hey,
the
Marg.
Mornington Peninsula.
Yes.
And I'm a member of the Housing Working Group of the Peninsula Advisory Committee on Elders. One of the things that we've been talking about in terms of another option in terms of increasing supply is the freeing up of the regulations around small secondary dwellings. And I wonder how much thought you've put into that in terms of actually letting people know it's available and how to encourage people to think about
Yes.
it as an option.
Yes, absolutely. This is a fantastic question because small second dwellings, I'm not sure whether people are across the detail, but as part of the housing statement, and this was announced for builds from December last year, if you have a land size of at least 300 square metres, you can put a second dwelling of up to 60 square metres on that land without need for a planning permit. You do still need a building permit because it has to be fit for purpose, and it is about making sure that we have opportunities to keep people, families together. That's often intergenerational, but it's also about making sure that there's prevention and early intervention around homelessness. If we can keep people, whether it's, I mean, they're called granny flats, but that's ridiculous because it is about a range of different uses for a range of different ages. It's work that sits adjacent to the work that Kids Undercover are doing, for example. Every night of the 1,000 people that they house, again, when we talk about vulnerability, around 25% of that group are Aboriginal young people. When we talk about older people's accommodation and living arrangements, a huge proportion of older people who are vulnerable to rough sleeping or homelessness are women. So second dwellings are a really important part of making sure that we can bring that additional supply into the mix and that we have standards that also apply around what minimum amenity looks like. Councils are a big part of this, and people may well have seen that a number of councils have been really receptive and encouraging of this work. But as we also release those draft targets for councils around housing density, there are a number of councils who have objected to small second dwellings on the basis that they will offend some sense of character. Now, this is where I would argue that visibility of a roofline shows that somebody is not homeless. So that's where, again, we will continue to work with councils, and including those councils who are doing a really wonderful job, and additional information is being made available. I'm really happy to share that with HAG as well so that that can be distributed. But the small second dwelling has been met with such a positive response because of what it is intended to achieve, and that's work which will continue. So I will absolutely make sure we can get you that, and thank you for the advocacy, particularly on the Mornington Peninsula, which has a significant need for social housing, but also, and I'll just add this as a tiny little bit at the end, the short stay levy is also something which is intended to address the huge number of houses that are vacant and therefore not available, say for short stay of up to 28 days, for permanent rental accommodation. And that's where we're doing a lot of work in that space with that levy being able to be returned to deliver additional social housing, but also to encourage people who own those properties. There's just under 50,000 standalone properties across Victoria that are not being occupied in any kind of permanent sense, to bring them into rental accommodation, which then means you've got people in communities who aren't living miles away in order to take a job in town, or who aren't rough sleeping or homeless because they can't find a home that is safe and secure and fits their needs.
Does the government foot the bill? Can the government foot the bill about the second one?
No,
Why not?
because that then sits as an asset for the purpose. Did everyone hear that question? Will government pay for the small second dwellings?
Second dwelling, if the government doesn't do it, how can they manage to do it then? Where can they get the money from?
it comes down, so property owners, so property values have gone up. I mean, we all know that affordability is a significant challenge because of the increase in property values. We're starting to see a plateau of those values, which means it's more affordable. It is more affordable here than it has been. And we're seeing growth continue to escalate across other jurisdictions. But here in Victoria, we've seen minimal growth, which is really important in terms of people's capacity to enter into the property market. It's creating challenges, of course, for people who are looking to downsize, changes to windfall, etc. But if you're going to add a second dwelling, you're also adding value to the property, which then means that you get a better return on your investment. The beneficiaries of that second dwelling arrangement are the ones who will be able to stay on that property and not become homeless as a result, which then takes pressure off the rest of the system while we invest that, at least $6.3 billion into social housing. Yeah, and then I'll have to vote.
Properties, there's plenty of opportunity for, sorry, Peter Sibley from United Housing Cooperative.
Hi, Peter.
A lot of community housing organisations have got lots of capacity to put a second dwelling in their backyards, and we've been asking for about 5 years for the director to consider reviewing the head lease situation to enable that to happen. But there's enormous capacity in the inner and middle city to do that. And, the United Housing Co-op for one, we've got about 30 or 40 properties that we could do a secondary dwelling in the backyard. So I would just ask you to put that on your agenda, please.
Thank
Minister.
you. And again, when it comes to housing, there's about 7 ministers who are responsible for housing, and that's planning, it's infrastructure development, it's the work within social and affordable housing, it's the work within regional development, local government. So I'm very happy to take that feedback back, but it's also about innovation. So when we're talking about innovation, it's about hearing from the sector. The things that work, the things that you would like to see changed, the way in which we can remove or reduce duplication, and the parts of the system that don't, in fact, exist at all. And that's then going to give us an opportunity to work, and for the first time in many, many years, constructively with the federal government to see the investments that they're making, but also to make sure whether it's homelessness and the $197 million that we've put into this year's budget, on top of the 300 million, whether it's the Social Housing Growth Fund, the work across the big housing build. We need all these component parts to come together in a way that meets the needs of communities. So I will absolutely take that back. Head leasing is a big part of the work that Homes Victoria does. Acquisitions, new builds, improvements, updates, maintenance, etc. It all needs to come together. So thank you, that's very useful. Okay,
That's you.
Yeah, I think that's me. I have to dash off to my my next commitment, but I just wanted to finish off by saying thank you. We talk about billions of dollars, and we talk about tens of thousands of people, and we talk about population growth in very large numbers. It's about people, and it's about lived experience being something which encourages and recognises dignity and contribution and connection. So it's hard work, as I said. If it were easy, it would have been done by now, but it's about staying the course, and this is where your advocacy will be a really central part of that work and has already been of key importance to the work that we are doing. So thank you all so much for having me today, and I'm looking forward to continuing the conversations and discussions from here. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much for coming, Minister Shing. And we will get the questions that have gone into the chat that didn't have time today, and we'll pass that on to the Minister's office for a response. As we've alluded to, there's a lot to be done. It's really important that we are all working together. We've had great attendance today by the Minister for Housing and the Minister for Planning. It's a really important opportunity for everyone to be working together. It sounds insurmountable, but it's not too bad if we all work together on this. So again, thank you, Minister, for attending. So we've got about 15 minutes before we have to wrap up today. Thank you. And I'm just going to briefly touch on some of the things that we think may be needed to address the issues. We also have some material out the front if you want to delve into this in a little bit more detail. And of course, we're always available for very long-winded conversations if you're interested. So as I mentioned earlier, there's many positive things in Victoria that target older people. we have our service. I should also give a big shout out to Wintringham, which is one of amazing housing provider for older people in Victoria. And I know other states are always wanting Brian to come and talk to them about the amazing work he does here so it can be replicated. I believe you're in Tassie now as well, Brian, which is great to see. So we do have some great things happening in Victoria, but as you've seen from the data, there's still a lot more to be done. I am going to take the opportunity to give a plug to our Home at Last service because it really is a unique service that helps older people to get secure, affordable and appropriate housing, and that's by assisting people to navigate the very complicated housing system. When people are in crisis, they find it very difficult to understand where they need to go for help. And so that service is available for anybody in Victoria aged 50 years and older if they want to get information about their housing options. If the outcomes we've shown through this service are the envy of other states. We've just recently had the Queensland government do a similar service based on our model in Brisbane, and South Australia is currently having a task force looking at it as well. So just to give you a bit of a snapshot, in the last financial year we assisted almost 1,800 older people with information and advice about their housing, and we have an early intervention approach, so we're trying to get people before they're sleeping on the floor of their kids' homes, so making a plan. And so that means that we're mainly assisting people who are eligible into long-term affordable housing, which is mainly public and community housing. And last year we assisted 180 people to get long-term housing. Of course, as I mentioned, older people find it very difficult to navigate the system, and so often Home at Last is their very first interaction with the system, with the service system. They just don't know what supports are available to them or how they can access that help. About 2/3 of our clients come from a culturally and linguistically diverse background, and they face numerous additional barriers when navigating the system and attempting to find help. They are mostly older women who have cared for their children and their families, and about half of the people that we support need physically accessible housing. Additionally, many older people who are experiencing homelessness do not realise or admit that they are experiencing homelessness. They may spend years and years couch surfing, house sitting and staying with friends before they end up with no home at all, and only then will they consider themselves to be homeless. And this is why it's so essential that we do that community education and we do that outreach, talking to seniors groups, going to seniors festivals, all of those sorts of things to talk about what housing is available and what does homelessness mean. But unfortunately, our service doesn't have enough funding to assist everyone. We are working on expanding into regional Victoria, and we've replicated our service in the Goulburn Valley Hume region. We're getting really fantastic outcomes up there as well. We've housed almost 30 people in 1 year. And unfortunately, though, this expansion is funded entirely through philanthropy, which is not a sustainable solution really, although we're extremely appreciative of the Ian Roller Curry Foundation. They do such great work to support us. We're really operating at capacity, and we have seen a 62% increase in calls over the last 2 years. So, as we've heard from some of our speakers today, we definitely need more housing supply. So we have to admit that the private rental market is not a great place to get old in, and that means we need a range of options, including things like what Wintringham provides, what Peter Sibley's co-op provides, and what the public housing and community housing sector provides. But we need a lot more. We would like to see at least 60,000 more public and community housing dwellings built by 2030, and we would like to continue to see that priority given to people aged 55 plus by ring fencing some of that housing. In terms of improving the quality of affordable housing options in Victoria, at the moment the affordable housing isn't necessarily that affordable because it's tagged to market rates, and 80% or 75% of the market rate isn't affordable. So we would like to see that there's a definition of affordable housing in legislation that actually ties it to people's income and not the market, because we're not seeing an end to the market increasing at this time. So we'd like to see some genuinely affordable housing legislated by government in exchange for government support. We do have some challenges in retirement housing. Retirement housing is a great option for many older people. It provides a sense of community. It can be a place where people can find great mates to hang out with a lot of the time. However, there's a lot of issues, as Shane has outlined. So to address those, we would like to see some legislative and regulatory reform. That means introducing consistent contracts. It means basic training and accreditation for retirement housing operators. There are some genuine rogues out there that you just would not believe. We also would like to see a retirement housing ombudsman to resolve disputes with some sort of expertise. And we'd like to see an end to excessive fees. So, not too much to do, hey? So, we're about to come to an end. I did want to say a big thank you to some people today. It's a really important conversation, and today's just the beginning of this. This is not going to end. HAG has been around for 40 years, and we are truly standing on the shoulders of the giants that started this organisation, and we continue that work. We would love not to have to be here in another 40 years. So together, with all of us working together, we can potentially change this. Not just for our kids and our grandkids, but for the people that are experiencing this today. So a big thank you to all of our speakers, particularly Chuping and Vida, who spoke about their experiences in person, and Glenda, who was unable to attend but gave her story as well. Big thanks to Katie Hall and her team for making this possible. It was a lot of work, thank you. And also, of course, thank you to the Minister and to the other MPs and Members of Parliament that have joined today. We have met with many of you, and we are always grateful for your ear and look forward to continuing how we can work together. Again, thank you to my sector colleagues, Brian Littman, Deborah Di Natale, Ben Rogers, Jennifer Beveridge, Catherine Butters, Juliana Todorovic. I'm sure I'm missing some people there. Thank you to all of the members that joined online, and a big thanks to our philanthropic funders, the Wicking Trust and the Ian Roller Curry Foundation. I'd also like to give a big thanks to our hardworking staff. We're a really small team. We punch above our weight. We're a tiny organisation, really, but you couldn't believe it. And so yeah, events like today are a lot of work. We have a team of people in the office assisting those members that couldn't come into Parliament today to join online. We've had Dinny and Lorraine and Ruben and Shane, Rebecca and Ira all in here today working really hard. And to the housing support staff who are endlessly taking those calls every day, hearing the terrible and sad stories for older people, but also achieving such great outcomes, a big thank you to you. So if you'd like to get in touch, do we have a slide, Ruben, to show for contact details? Also, I'd encourage you to become a member of HAG if you're not already. Great newsletter, awesome group of people, free, as Vanessa can attest to. Of course, if you're in housing crisis, please give our HAG number a call at 1300 765 178. And we do have a number of events coming up for the Seniors Festival sponsored by the Victorian Government, so get on board with those as well. They're available on our website. Thank you again for coming today. Great work, everyone, and be speaking soon.